So good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth installment of Between the Pillars, the Fisher Library's biweekly video podcast series, where we take a closer look at some of our collections at the library and get to know some of our staff as well. So if you missed any of the previous episodes, you can watch them all on our YouTube channel. They're all saved there. Also, rewatching the last episode, which we did 2 weeks ago with the Fisher's director, Laura McDonald, I noticed that I actually forgot to introduce myself. So my name is John Shoesmith, and I'm the outreach librarian here at the Fisher Library. And I say here is not quite accurate, since you might notice that this episode has a bit of a different look than the previous ones. Due to the renewed lockdown on the city because of the spread of the coronavirus, we've decided to do the last two podcasts of Between the Pillars of 2020 responsibly, and thus remotely, so that we're not in the same room together at the same time. So as you can see, I'm not inside our beautiful building, but instead I'm at home in my apartment, in my home office here in the west end of the city. And we're also pre-recording this, since we were worried a little bit about the technology of live casting in a remote setting. But it's less than 24 hours from when this actual podcast will be shown. So it's fairly close to the day that we're going to be having this up on YouTube. We do hope, however, that when we turn the calendar into 2021, and I think a lot of us are looking forward to turning the calendar into 2021, that the conditions will again allow us to do these live and from Fisher. But we are doing it in one take, so we're going to be hopefully simulating as much as possible the experience of the live of doing this live. However, you can see my colleague David Fernández is at the Fisher.
Hello.
And he's today's participant. So welcome, David.
Thank you, John.
I wish I could be there with you, but we're trying to do this responsibly, as I said.
Good idea.
So a bit of intro into David, and this is actually, I want to talk from a personal point of view. Much like a previous participant from a few weeks back, Alex Carter, David came to us when he was a student when he was studying at the iSchool. And again, I do remember I was on the two-person committee that hired him. But that was an interesting hire because David was scheduled on the second day of interviews, and I ended up missing his interview. Do you remember why? Do you remember why I did?
Yeah, you had a bike accident.
I had a bike accident coming home the previous night, and a dog ran out in front of me on my bike, and I got doored by a dog, if you want to call it that. So I broke my elbow. So when David was doing his interview, I was probably most likely at the fracture clinic at St. Joe's Hospital down the street from me. So, but I do remember talking to PJ Carefoot, the current head of the department, who was the other member of that committee, and he told me the next day that David's passion for our library was very clearly evident. And that tends to be one of the attributes that we seek when we're hiring at Fisher. The passion, the proverbial fire in the belly for the work we do in rare books and special collections. Actually, David, I want to ask the same question I asked Alex when I talked about this as well. Do you remember your very first work thing you did at Fisher as a student?
Yes, I did, or I do. I worked on the Spanish play collection.
Okay.
And Dunderman, the director of the time, I remember she assigned that particular task to me. We had students, graduate students from the Spanish department work on that collection before I did, and then librarians worked on that collection. One of those collections that took years to catalog. The university acquired that collection in the early 70s, and I finished cataloging the bulk of that collection about 2 years ago. So after 7,000 volumes of Spanish plays from 1840 to 1940, we have one of the best collections of that particular genre here at the Fisher.
Were you aware of that collection at all when you got hired?
No, not before I came into the Fisher. Okay. And I remember Anne introducing me to the collection, and like most of our students, I was very excited about it, and maybe more excited than I should have been. But I was very eager, and to be quite frank, I learned cataloging.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's probably a great introduction.
It was amazing. Yeah, so PJ Carefoot and Philip Oldfield were the ones, who I normally went to whenever I had cataloging questions. It was a great project for any student, but for me, it was a great introduction into special collections.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about your background, obviously from your accent. We can tell you're not.
Do I have an accent, John?
You have a beautiful accent. It's a very sort of mellifluous accent, I would say. So tell us a little bit about your background. You're from South America.
Yes, I was born and raised in Venezuela, and I came to Canada when I was 19.
Right.
And I came to U of T in 2005 and never left. I did my
Curious when you first came to Canada, how good was your English?
I learned here. Okay. So it took me, my dad spoke English at home sometimes, but I had, I would say intermediate vocabulary, but I couldn't really speak it much. Right. And so I did a lot of studying for a year and so before I began my undergraduate studies at U of T. And my background is in Latin American studies and Spanish and Portuguese, or literatures from Spain, Portugal, and Latin America.
Okay. So basically, you've brought a lot of that undergrad experience then in those areas to the work you do at Fisher. I'm curious, though, how did you originally get interested in rare books and special collections? Was it something that you only became more aware of when you moved to Canada? Was it something that you might have been aware of in Venezuela?
I always loved books. As a kid, my father had encyclopedias. He bought encyclopedias for us in the house, and I remember spending entire afternoons just going through volumes of like medical encyclopedias or Encyclopedia Britannica, but in Spanish. So I was always an avid reader, but unlike Canada, where I grew up in Venezuela, I didn't have a lot of access to books, and especially books from libraries. So when I moved to Canada, I think it was such a privileged position to be in as a new immigrant, to have access to such amazing collections through the Toronto Public Library, and also the holdings at the University of Toronto. And I got interested in special collections in my undergraduate. I was first introduced to the Fisher by Professor Josiah Blackmore of the Spanish and Portuguese department at U of T. He's now at Harvard, and he took his classes, most of his classes, to the Fisher every year. And I was doing a class on Portuguese literature, and we came to see our collection of epic poetry. And I just remember I've never been so impressed by a space or even the collections. It was amazing.
What is the strength of our Spanish and Portuguese collection?
So we have two remarkable collections here at the Fisher. The first is the Milton Alexander Buchanan collection of Spanish and Italian history and literatures. And Professor Buchanan taught at U of T from the beginning of the 20th century. I think he arrived here in 1908, if I'm not mistaken. And he rapidly progressed his career here at the university. He was the dean of Italian and Spanish when those two departments were together. And he was a book collector, and one of the greatest book collectors the university ever had. And his amazing collections of Spanish history, literature, and Italian history and literature are here at the Fisher. And he donated those started donating those in the 50s. And so that's one. And the strength of that collection is Spanish Golden Age literature, but many of our holdings of Latin Americana are also part of the Milton Buchanan collection. The other collection is Professor Ralph Stanton, who was an expert in a professor of mathematics, and he had a prolific and very important career in that field here in Canada. But he was also a book collector. No, not at U of T. He worked at various universities, York, I think Western and Manitoba.
I think Waterloo as well. I think he was sort
Waterloo.
of one of the creators of kind of the computer sciences programs there.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And his collection, very much like Buchanan, has different focus points, but one of them is Portuguese epic poetry, which is an important genre and an important area of collecting for us here at the Fisher. But books on Brazil or about Brazil, and an impressive collection on Portuguese history in general, but also French history.
Right.
He was also a collector of French drama, for example.
So one of the things we always talk about, and it's kind of been a consistent theme with these podcasts, is our collection philosophy, especially around building from strength. Yeah. So obviously we have these two pillars of Spanish and Portuguese literature, but I guess there was a gap a little bit in terms of particularly the Latin American side of things.
There was and there wasn't. So when I first started assessing the collections, in my first and second year here at the Fisher, I quickly realized that we had impressive collections on sort of like a British approach or a British perspective on Latin America. Right. So we have a pretty good collection of travel literature written in English and published mainly in London, dealing with Latin America, starting with beautiful illustrated plate books from the 18th century, but mostly the 19th century. So that's one of the areas that I've been adding to. So every year I try to add at least between 3 and 5 important playbooks on that area. So for example, recently we bought 12 Views in the Interior of Guyana, published in 1841, and is arguably the most impressive playbook or the most important playbook on Guyana. So now that is in the collections. But of course there are, like we do here at the Fisher, we collect on strength with a focus on supporting research and teaching on traditional disciplines, but also emergent disciplines.
Right.
And the Latin American Studies program here at UFT, and there are various courses in the history department that use our collections a lot. And so a lot of our additions, or a lot of the items that I've collected over the last 5 or 6 years, I'm thinking about their use not only for research and how they complement the collection, but how they will be used for students, by students when they visit us here at the Fisher.
Right. So we're not just buying for the fun of it.
Sometimes we do, but they often, fit the collections, or they always fit the collections well, and we can always use them for teaching and, of course, research.
So we talk a little bit about, the books that come from a European perspective, but what about books then that were being produced in Latin America or Mexico? Did we have much of a strength in that area as well?
If in the Canadian context, we do.
Right.
So if we were to compare ourselves or our collections to our peers, south of the border, we don't.
Right.
Some of the best collections are at the John Carter Brown Library or at the Huntington, but we do have a good research and teaching collection, mainly 18th century Latin American imprints on indigenous languages.
Right.
And so I've been adding to that collection ever since I started working here. Okay. And so by this point, the printing press arrives in Mexico City in 1539. And so by the 18th century, these books have already their own identity, and they already are not surrogates of Spanish imprints. Their look, the way they're produced, have already matured, and we have really good examples of this kind of specimens or printing specimens in the collections.
Okay, there's something you're going to show to us today, though. So maybe just let's throw on the document camera and take a look.
You want to see it now? So here we have this is the second edition of the first bilingual dictionary, or the first dictionary for that matter, published in the Americas. The first edition is from 1555, and it was printed by Juan Pablos, who was the first printer in the Americas. This edition is from 1571, is the second and large edition that contains the two parts. The first part is the dictionary or the vocabulario, So let me show you the actual title page with the printer's device.
Yep.
So, vocabulario en lengua castellana y mexicana, compuesta, Padre Fray Alonso de Molina, published in Mexico by Antonio de Espinosa. And Antonio de Espinosa was the second printer in Mexico. So, sort of like winking the word to William Caxton. They had sort of the same kind of relationship. Antonio de Espinosa worked for Juan Pablos, who was the first printer in Mexico. And Antonio de Espinosa was also a type founder. So that's why this book is not only important in terms of its content, but as a printed book, it's a beautiful example of early Mexican printing.
Would we have known how many of these would have been produced? The second edition?
So I can tell you there are about a dozen copies that survive, including this one.
But
it's
which
difficult.
It probably wasn't a huge run.
Exactly, which is the case for a lot of printed books in the European context, but also in the Latin American context. As you can imagine, any of these books would have been extremely expensive to produce.
Well, that was actually my next question. I mean, what audience was this this type of book being produced for?
So picture it. We're in Mexico City in the 16th century. The conquest in Mexico takes place in the 1520s. And here we have a vocabulario or a dictionary of Spanish and Nahuatl. And so who is the audience for this? So these are for officials, but government officials, but mainly for priests and missionaries who want to learn Nahuatl in order to teach not only Spanish to indigenous peoples, but also to convert them to Christianity.
Interesting.
Yes, but who is the modern audience for a book like this, and how do we use them in classes? Like I show them for classes on colonial history to understand the role of the book in the early campaigns led by different missionaries in the Americas, but also for those of us here that are interested in print culture and book history. It also has a lot of neologisms. So introducing terminology for printing, for example. So here we have imprimir libros, or to print books or other things, or here cosa impresa, or so these are terms that would have been introduced into the Nahuatl language. And here we have, for example, for books, the different terms for books. It starts with librería or bookstore, and then the equivalent in Nahuatl, and then libro, que se vende, booksellers, and then book and small book, account books, and so on.
Interesting. A lot of people looking at that title page would be horrified, I would think, to see the annotations. But we, as rare book librarians, love annotations. Maybe you could explain why.
Well, especially in this copy. So when this copy, when I saw it in the market, that was one of the things, apart from what the book is about and who printed it and the author, the fact that this particular copy is fully annotated. So the title page has a lot of provenance annotations, but as you go through the book, there are notes like this, where at least 2 or 3 generations of readers and owners have added their own commentary on the book. And if you see just a random page, and here we have a reader adding 3 additional texts or terms. In some cases we have additional terms, but we also have corrections. So this copy has a lot to offer for researchers of Nahuatl in this case, but for students in book history as well.
Yeah, I mean the annotations tend to be well, first of all, it's interesting to see the different hands. I would assume you can probably track not precisely to how many owners of this book there would have been, but obviously there were more than one owner.
Yes, and as you probably know, it took me a long time to catalog this book,
Right.
and I'm still not done. And so
Okay.
every now and then I go back to it and see if I can find or identify some of the names that are listed here.
Right. Interesting. So maybe we can go back to our little chat. So I'm wondering, with how do you hope to build this collection ultimately? It's always one of the questions I like to ask people that are acquiring materials to build to our collections. Obviously, this is one piece. What kind of other books are you looking then to really sort of expand upon this collection?
That's a good question. Like I said, the way we collect here at the Fisher and the way I collect, we continue to assess the collections. And in reality, most of our collecting decisions are made by the collections themselves.
Right.
So things that we already have or that we don't have, we try to fill those gaps. In the area of Latin Americana, what I'm hoping to do, or at least the legacy of my time here at the Fisher, is to create good or extensive, I should say, research and teaching collections in this area.
Right.
Latin Americans in Canada also have played a big role in the social and cultural fabric of this nation. So that's one of the areas that I'm also interested in. And we do collect Latin American literature published in Canada. And so hopefully at some point I can do a project or some research in that area. So it's not just early printed books from the Americas, from the early modern period, but I'm interested in all periods as well.
It's exciting too, because I mean, you still have a long history left at Fisher, so
I hope so.
It'll be interesting to see over the next 25, 30 years, where you continue to build these collections.
Yes, and I look forward to doing all the work that it takes to do that.
Okay. Anyway, Debbie, this has been great. Again, thanks for doing this remotely. I know it's a challenge for all of us, COVID times. As I say, we've got one more to do in 2020. It's going to be in 2 weeks' time with PJ Carefoot, the head of Rare Books and Special Collections, and we're going to take a holiday theme since we're very close to the Christmas period. So we look forward to having PJ with us for in the next couple of weeks. So again, David, thanks again for this.
And thank you, John.
Say hi to the Fisher for me.
I will.
I definitely miss being there. As I said, please join us again in 2 weeks, and hope enjoy your weekend. Thank you.
Take care.